Up on stage is Professor Manuel Trajtenberg, who is the chairman of Planning and Budgeting Committee of the Israeli Council of Higher Education. Manuel is also a former consultant to the Prime Minister and the chair of an Israeli National Economic Council. Welcome.
Hi, how are you doing?
How are you doing?
Good morning to you all. I'm certainly delighted to be here and to share the stage with such distinguished speakers. If I have to single out one factor that Sweden and Israel have in common, it certainly wouldn't be the weather, but it would be the centrality of innovation in our economies as an engine of growth. So what I intend to do today, in the brief time I have at my disposal, is to present to you what innovation is all about in Israel, what are the ingredients that may account for the so-called silicon miracle of Israel, and then give you a bit of caution about how to interpret that and try to draw some lessons or insights that may be useful to you as well. First of all, when we look at innovation in Israel, and you may know that Israel has been called the startup nation, the statistics are really stunning. I mean, we lead in R&D over GDP in terms of startups and so forth and so on. But beyond the statistics, it's important to know that we all around the world, we enjoy some of the big innovations that were done in Israel. For example, social networks started really with ICQ, which is the first instant messaging system that was developed in Israel. We all carry discount keys in our pockets. That's an Israeli innovation. Agriculture all around the world is enjoying the benefits of the revolution brought about by dripping, which is an Israeli innovation. Digital printing that we take for granted originated in Indigo, that was later on sold to HP. And if you look now at the smart driving, congestion, and so forth, Waze is one of the best companies in the world, an Israeli company that is addressing that issue, was recently bought by Google for $1 billion. And Mobileye, you may have in your cars, if you have a new model, 2014, you may have a Mobileye sensors for collision avoidance. So it's not just the statistics that we're going to see, but also very practical innovations that make a difference in our lives. And yet the statistics are there. Okay, so for many years now, Israel has been the leading country in the world in terms of investments in R&D over GDP. Sweden is just next to it. In terms of patents, we were talking about patents before. Yes, you know, patents are very troublesome in many, many ways, but still it's an indicator. So patents per 1,000 population, Sweden is high up, and we are 2 places below, so very similar in that respect. Listing of high-tech companies in NASDAQ. This is an important indicator because it says something not only about innovation, but also about globalization, the way you as a country approach your place in the world. And what's remarkable here is that Israel is, after the US, the country with the most IPOs, companies listed in NASDAQ. And in fact, it's not far from the whole of Europe. The whole of Europe has now 84 companies listed, that's it. So this is something to keep in mind. It's not a direct indicator of innovation, but innovation vis-a-vis globalization. So what accounts for that? Well, it's obviously impossible to summarize that briefly, but let me point out to some of the key elements that may explain that. First of all, the role of universities. I may be partial because I've been in charge of the university system in Israel for 5 years now, and so, you know, we want to remark what we are doing. But there is no question that the university system in Israel, with its long tradition of excellence, has played and is playing a key role in fostering innovation. First of all, by the obvious, which is to provide the true infrastructure, human capital, skills, scientific progress, and so forth. Without doubt, I mean, you don't have anything to go for, and the universities have to provide for that. But then there is those innovations that are born in the university lab, and you want them to be carried through in industry. And Israel is one of the country after the US that is leading in terms of technology transfer, in taking patents, in establishing TTOs, technology transfer offices, and designing a system of incentives that bring those innovation to industry. And then there is this graph, which is, I think, it's interesting. You have on the vertical axis the level of innovation of the country, and on the horizontal one, university industry collaboration in R&D. So there is a clear positive, strong positive correlation between these two, and you can see there Israel and Sweden and Switzerland and Finland very high up in this graph. So the second key ingredient, of course, is entrepreneurship and venture capital that goes with it. Now, entrepreneurship, of course, is very hard to capture, to measure. We tend to present statistics that are easy to compare worldwide, but we have to be careful with those statistics. As the famous saying by Albert Einstein goes, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts, right? So entrepreneurship is key. It's difficult to count or to put a number on it, but nevertheless, it's crucial. So we have lots of young people in Israel that have that attitude that takes to become an entrepreneur. And what I want to remark is particularly the can-do attitude. There is no problem that is big enough for one of these youngsters to tackle. We hear that, but then when you experience it firsthand, you realize that. I have 3 daughters, aged 28, 25, and 20. And the 3 of them, each one of them is a very different field. And nevertheless, they are kind of born entrepreneurs. And, I listen to them, the way they approach issues, problems, and this daring attitude, that they want to make a difference. They see, these glasses are not well arranged. They will find a different way of doing it. And they're not afraid of failure. That's incredibly important, and we're going to elaborate on that in a moment. The other factor which is very important for these youngsters is that they feel very comfortable in the international arena, not just in the US. The US is kind of, for them, already boring because, it's, everybody has been there. But they feel comfortable in Nepal, in India. In India, if you go around in the most exotic places, it's full of Israelis, young Israelis, and in Peru and in Brazil and all over the place. And that brings with it not just that comfort, which is very important, but also new challenges. Because, the way creativity works is when you have points of references, comparisons. If everything is the same, well, you don't know any better. But if you see how things are done differently, how problems manifest themselves differently in different countries, you come up with ideas. Okay, so that's incredibly important. Now, where does it come from? I wouldn't pretend to understand that. Clearly, multiculturalism plays a role, a competitive culture and so forth, but this is beyond me. On the other hand, our entrepreneurs, our young entrepreneurs, are not good in terms of being patient. And patience is very important. They want a quick win, they want the eureka and then exit and go on to the next challenge, to the next idea. That's not good. We lack managerial skills for larger organizations. We were talking about that yesterday at dinner, and it was mentioned also as a problem in Sweden. And this is important to realize that, because it's not just the idea, the first implementation, the IPO in NASDAQ, and the exit. I mean, you need to build a continuum in order for innovations to contribute to society at large. Now, I said before, it's incredibly important not to fear failure. This graph, I think, is the most telling. It shows you that every year there are over about 700 new startups created, and half of them fail, year in and year out. And our youngsters that are engaged in this, our innovators, they take pride in that. They take pride in the fact that, they attempted this and that and they failed, and then the third time, the 10th time, they hit, the right idea. So that's part, this churning, this birth and death, it's incredibly important. Now, these are statistics which are clearly an understatement, because these are the registered companies. There are many more that are not registered, that are their garage type operations, that they never make it to these statistics. So, right now, as I said before, we have about 3,500 kind of high-tech companies, and their identity keeps changing. That's the stuff you need. That's what grows this startup nation. Venture capital, clearly you need some way of financing on a continuous basis these hundreds and thousands of initiatives. And in Israel, we managed to develop a very strong venture capital industry. And these days, it's not just venture capital. It's also angel investors and others. What's important is not just the money, but the skills and the knowledge and the experience of these people that are behind the venture capital. Most of them are former entrepreneurs that created a company, innovated, exited, and now want to mentor new inventors, to tutor them, to coach them, and to put also the money there. So this is clearly very, very important. Now, the last element here is government support for commercial R&D. I was born in Argentina, so I have a basic kind of mistrust of governments and policies. And I'm very careful not to praise governments too much. And typically, I don't have much trouble with that because there is not much to praise. But in terms of innovation policy, I must say that it's one of the fields of policy that in Israel we had it right. And it came about out of need. In the early 70s, Israel was grappling with the question, what do we do? I mean, we don't have resources, we are far, we are isolated, etc., etc. How we can find engines of growth, given that the one thing we have is talent, is skills, is science. And so a decision was made in a very conscious way to jumpstart that what later was called the high-tech industry, at the time it was called the science-based industry, by providing essentially support for commercial R&D. And from the beginning, the policies were neutral, meaning, as was said before, we don't never pick winners. We don't try to outguess the market, to predict future trends. That never works. Never try to do it, okay? You may be right today, wrong tomorrow, and the other way around, okay? So you let the market come to you every time with new ideas. And the second element of policies, which is incredibly important, is when you are talking about policies for innovation, you're talking by definition about a subject matter which is changing all the time. And therefore, the policies have to change as well. The last thing you want is rigid policies for a changing field. So what you want is programs that change along the way. Now, our programs are similar to Vinnova. The basic one is matching grants to commercial R&D. We support generic consortia. industry academic collaborations, incubators. We jump-started the venture capital industry in the early 1990s, and so forth. Kind of this is the main stuff of policy there. Now, I said before, yes, great statistics, innovative nation. Do we stop there? No. Actually, not all is well with our system, and it's important to put it on the table. I believe that countries cannot learn from the successes of others. Countries can learn from the mistakes of others. And so I want to present to you also our shortcomings. First of all, I said before, we have been number one for many years in terms of R&D expenditures, where competition is intensifying. The latest statistics show that South Korea already has overcome us. Both Israel and Sweden have gone down one notch. That's not terribly important. It's a ranking. But it's telling of the intensification of international competition. Moreover, I was showing the numbers for R&D over GDP, but the absolute amount of investment in R&D counts. It's not just the relative one. And when you have China now becoming a superpower in terms of R&D investment, this is a changed world. And Sweden and Israel, we are low, of course, in terms of the absolute investment. That means, and should mean for us, that we have to be very careful where we channel those investments, because clearly we cannot pretend even to compete with the great guys, the elephants in the room. But more importantly, and this is the main problem we have in Israel, is that innovation, the success of innovation in Israel has not translated into prosperity for society at large. Essentially, we have created a dual economy. There is a thriving, prosperous, high-tech sector, strongly connected to Silicon Valley and abroad and so forth and so on, but we have rising socioeconomic inequality. And this is a big problem. Why is that? Well, there are quite a few reasons. Some of it has to do with the composition of innovation. We put an emphasis and support mainly product innovations and not process innovations. But most of the economy, most of the employment is in the service sector, is in traditional industries and so forth, where products don't count as much. What you need is to innovate in processes. And if you don't, then you create a wide disparity between the two. We are proud of the fact that there are 250 labs from the biggest multinationals in the world operating in Israel. It's really remarkable. I mean, every important multinational has labs in Israel. And so, I mean, it benefits the multinationals. What they do is they absorb local talent. They come to Israel because they know that there is so much young talent there. And they pay salaries to these guys, and they take the knowledge and the innovations elsewhere. So, why should I be so happy about this fact? And then we have, I said, great, we have VCs, and they are essential in order to finance innovation. Yes, but, the VC mentality is one of, do your innovation, and in 7 years or whatever, exit. Do an IPO, cash in, that's what the VC is for. And so that creates wrong incentives in terms of developing the economy at large. So we created really a powerhouse in terms of innovations, but not quite in benefiting society at large. And this is something that should give us a pause. We have not managed to create an inclusive system of innovation. And as I said, this is something that I'm very concerned about. Now, what can we draw from these facts? Well, the must do, I think that some also refer to it. We can, talk about 3 factors, 4 factors, 5 factors. We're talking more or less about the same. But let me say something about the first one. You see, innovation entails change. And the first order of the day, if you want to have continuous innovation, is you have to be able to cope with continuous change. And that's easier said than done, because there is a tendency always to keep things as they are. Of course, you need the incentives and finance and all that, but I want to develop the notion of innovative university, which is very much what I'm working on these days. So clearly the university of this century is not just about the two traditional roles and missions, which were doing basic research and educating the elite. But it's also about social mobility, it's also about the needs of a changing market for labor and so forth, and it's about innovation and economic growth. And the question is, can universities deliver that? Well, in order for that to happen, universities need to change the way they operate. And you need to diversify the institutional modes. What was good just for basic research cannot be good for everything else. You need multi-layer collaborations, etc. You need to be not too possessive with intellectual property, because otherwise you're going to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. I want to finish with some reflections on Sweden. Clearly, you are one of the best economists in the world. Just keep it that way and you can rest assured. So I wouldn't presume to give you any advice. But yes, I want to remark that, in my view, the biggest threat to Sweden is its own success. Because the success doesn't put pressure on you. And you have to recognize, this was mentioned before, that global competition is really increasing at a tremendous pace. I look at, there are 198 countries in the world. About half of them are actively engaged in the same discussion and conversation we are having here. Everybody wants to be a key player. We talked about the young generation. That's crucial. You need to instill in the youngsters the urgency of innovating in order to make ahead. You have to promote global links. I mentioned the importance of that. You have to ask yourself how many of your entrepreneurs know Chinese, are fluent in Chinese, how many spend time in Silicon Valley, etc. And you have to avoid making mistakes like the ones we did in Israel. But I want to finish with one observation, and this arose from the discussion we had last night. If you ask almost anybody around the world, what association comes to mind when you think of Sweden? The association is of a country that has a great quality of life, that has a cohesive society, that the disparities are not big. Okay, that's the association. Now, that's a tremendous asset. And, because you are small in a big world, okay, you have to play that asset out also in the realm of innovation in two ways. You want to attract talent? That's the way to attract talent, is to tell, you ask the question, where do you want to be if you have the choice, if you are young, okay, and an entrepreneur? Most people will answer Silicon Valley. But then you can ask the following question. Okay, sure, in Silicon Valley, you will make more money than in Sweden. Okay, and you may be able to make more money faster. But where do you want to raise your children? Where do you want to spend your old age? And that, then the answer may be Sweden. So you have to play that out in order to attract, to retain, to cultivate the innovators of the future. Sweden can be something which no other country manages to do right now, which is to be rich, prosperous, innovative, and to have equity and fairness in society. You can be a beacon for that. That can be a motive that can ignite your youngsters' imagination. So I appreciate that very much, and I really am happy to be here to take part in this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Manuel. Now you give us hope here at the end for us Swedes with the broad, well, we do have a lot of nature and what you're talking about, equality, life equality. We also have equality, but we have life quality. Now you said you should, when we met at dinner also yesterday, you said we should be proud of our talents, we should put the failures on our resume, which we really don't do here in Sweden yet. You also mentioned we have to create a sense of urgency, not least in the young generation, and we should not do your mistakes. Right. So we should bring back the knowledge we throw out. Now you will stay here for the whole day, and you will also come with comments on the last session is a kind of shadow innovation council. We're going to create this on stage, and Manuel and the next speaker will also be watching, listening, and giving advice if we're talking about the right things. Okay. So we're looking very much forward to hearing from you again a little bit later in the day. Thank you very much, Manuel Trajtenberg.